A millionaire disguised himself as a beggar, and only one woman gave him food. The next day, she received an unexpected letter. From the 32nd floor, Elías Navarro watched the city like someone contemplating a world that no longer belonged to him. Down below, the cars were racing. The passers-by were crossing the streets like impatient ants, and the faces, all of them, seemed too distracted to notice anything other than their own urgencies. That time no longer made him feel big. It made him feel distant, cold, a man frozen inside his own glass fortress. In recent months, Elías had buried more than his mother. He had also buried the last thread of tenderness that connected him to someone. After the reading of the will, when he discovered that part of the estate was to be transferred to a public hospital, against his brother's wishes, he was treated like a traitor. The same people who had once fawned over him now shunned him. The man who had built empires with a signature now spent his days in silence, watching his legacy become the headline of a family feud. Empathy, he realized, was a rare luxury, perhaps non-existent, or perhaps only visible when you're invisible. That morning, he didn't tell anyone. He just left his suit on the rack, changed his shoes for a worn-out pair he'd found in the storeroom, rubbed fireplace ash into his hair and face. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize himself. That was the idea. He walked down the stairs of the building. No one paid any attention. On the first floor, he passed receptionists who revered him every day. None of them looked up. When he stepped onto the sidewalk, he felt something new. Silence. Not the silence of a rooftop, but the silence of indifference. No one said good morning. No one looked away. No one asked for a selfie. For the first time in a long time, he was free. And for the first time too, he was nobody. He walked to a modest neighborhood, stopped in front of a corner bakery, and sat down on the sidewalk. The ground was cold. The sun no longer touched that part of the street. He stretched out a hand, not to beg, but to test the world. The world responded with haste. Expensive shoes swerved. Bags were pressed against his chest. Some even crossed to the other side of the sidewalk. Hours passed. My stomach rumbled. The cold had already seeped into his bones. He thought about giving up. Maybe this was just another crazy idea from a man who was too rich to really suffer. But then, she appeared. His hair was messily tied up. His uniform was stained with paint, and he had an exhausted expression on his face. He was carrying a bag of bread and a cheap juice. When she saw him, she slowed down. He looked around. No one was paying attention. Without saying a word, she knelt down in front of him. She took out one of the loaves of bread, broke it in half, and handed it to him gently. Then she put the juice next to it. "You're not alone," she whispered, as if she wasn't just talking to him. Elías didn't answer, but there, on that cold sidewalk, he felt something he hadn't felt for years, human warmth, and that warmth would stay with him until the next day, when an unexpected letter would come through the door from the person who least expected the reward. The smell of cheap coffee mixed with disinfectant permeated the air. In Valeria's small apartment, it was 6:40 in the morning when the alarm went off, but she had already been up for 15 minutes, washing her uniforms in the makeshift tank on the balcony. She wasn't the type to sleep peacefully. She took care of her sick grandmother on her own, worked 2 shifts as a cleaner, and still found time to help neighbors who barely had enough to eat. She was what they called, with pity or contempt, too good. That morning, when he opened the door to get the newspaper he never read, he found something, a thick cream envelope, with a gold seal and handwritten letters. There was no sender, just her name, Valeria Rivas. He felt his heart racing. It wasn't often that he received letters, and certainly not like that. He walked in and sat down at the table carefully, as if the paper might fall apart at the touch. With his fingers still damp, he broke the wax seal. Inside, a full-bodied page with firm lines. "Miss Rivas, the generosity he showed yesterday did not go unnoticed. I'd like to invite you to lunch tomorrow at 1 p.m. at the Alma Vieja restaurant on Call 18. All the costs have already been taken care of. Just give your name at reception. No obligations, no ulterior motives, just a gesture in return. Someone who has been touched by your kindness. Valeria read and reread it. Her first reaction was suspicion. Could it be a trap, a cruel joke, a scam? But the handwriting, it was too beautiful. And the choice of restaurant, one of the most expensive in the city, made no sense. No one she knew could afford Mr. had any reason to spend so much on her. The image of the man on the sidewalk came back to her. The tired eyes, the silence, the cold. Something was different about him. She didn't know what, but that gesture had marked her more than she had expected. She picked up the phone. She called her friend Ines, hesitantly. She told her about the letter. "You're out of your mind," replied Ines. "It could be human trafficking, Val. Nobody gives anything away for free." Valeria laughed, but didn't reply. Deep down, she didn't believe it was a threat. There was a subtle peace in that letter, as if it had been written by someone who was hurt, but sincere. The next day, she put on her only decent blouse, applied burgundy lipstick, and tied her hair up in an elegant bun. For a moment, the mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized. He arrived at the restaurant with his heart pounding. The facade was imposing, with glass windows and soft music coming through the cracks. A security guard gave her a strange look, but she took a deep breath and went in. "Buenas tardes," she said, almost voiceless. "Me llamo Valeria Rivas. They invited me." The receptionist smiled discreetly, as if he had expected her. "Oh, accompany me, please." Valeria was led to a reserved table at the back, next to a large window overlooking the city. In the seat opposite, a man in a gray suit was already waiting for her. And when she saw who it was, her eyes went wide. The beggar from the sidewalk was there. Elegant, mysterious, but the eyes, they were the same. Elías stood up, removed his hat and said with a calm smile, "Gracias por haberme visto, cuando nadie más lo hizo." Valeria stood, confused. This was the same figure huddled on the sidewalk 2 days earlier. But now he was wearing a tailored suit, his hair was neatly combed, and he exuded the kind of elegance she'd only seen in movies or in downtown shop windows. Even so, something about him remained the same. The look, the calm, the strange melancholy. "Please," said Elías, pointing to the chair in front of him. "Siéntate." She hesitated, but obeyed. Her hands were shaking a little. The waiter appeared discreetly, and served sparkling water and artisan bread, as if this were just another meeting between sophisticated clients. "It was me," he said bluntly. "Who left the letter?" Valeria opened her mouth, but didn't know what to say. The revelation wasn't a total surprise, but hearing it out loud, made it all seem even more surreal. "Who are you?" he asked in a low voice. He paused, then he smiled, a short, restrained smile. "I'm Elías Navarro." The name reverberated like silent thunder in his mind. He had heard the name in the news, in the headlines of corporate and philanthropic scandals. A tycoon, who had inherited factories, construction companies, and influence. They said he was cold, ruthless, untouchable. "Why were you on the street? Why in disguise?" Elías took a deep breath before answering. He didn't look uncomfortable, he looked tired of lies. "I needed to see something that money can't buy. I wanted to know if goodness still existed. You showed it to me without asking for anything." Valeria squeezed the glass between her fingers. She was still suspicious. It was hard to believe that there wasn't a hidden price. She was used to seeing favors disguised as kindness. "I'm not looking for anything from you," continued Elías, as if reading his thoughts. "I just wanted to thank you. There's food everywhere. But humanity, that's rare." She finally relaxed a little. She leaned back in her chair, but her eyes remained alert. "Bueno, gracias. But you didn't have to do all this," he said, looking around at the marble surroundings, fresh flowers and silverware. "Yes, I had to do it." The silence between them was interrupted by the waiter bringing the first course, a delicate starter that Valeria couldn't name. She carefully tried it. It was mild, different, but good. "What else do you do, apart from disguise yourself and leave mysterious letters?" she asked, with a slight smile. Elías laughed sincerely. It was the first time someone had spoken to him like that, without fear, without formality. without interest. And that lightness disarmed him. Lately, I'm trying to learn to be less of a coward, less absent. And two, you've reminded me why it's worth trying. Valeria didn't answer, but in that instant, something inside her also began to change. For the first time in a long time, she felt that someone saw her not as an invisible or functional woman, but as someone who left a mark. Lunch continued with stories exchanged, long looks, pauses that didn't hurt. Two worlds so far apart, sitting at the same table, trying to find a common language between wounds and affections. In the end, Elias got up, paid the bill quietly, and accompanied her to the exit. At the door, he held out his hand, but not for a formal shake. It was a slow, delicate gesture, like someone handing over trust. "I'd love to see you again," he said sincerely. Valeria looked at him for a few seconds. She didn't reply with words, she just nodded, with a restrained but genuine smile. And as she turned the corner, it was no longer just her who was carrying something new in her chest. The following days seemed to float away in Valeria's memory. It was as if that afternoon in the restaurant had taken place in a parallel reality, one where someone like her was seen, heard and valued by someone like him. But real life didn't stop. Grandma needed her medication. The school was being renovated and required more effort. Inez kept making jokes and warnings about mysterious rich people. And yet, every night, Valeria found herself reliving Elias' eyes. The way he listened to her. The way he said little, but said it with truth. On Thursday, on his way home from work with rain-soaked shoes and a tired heart, his cell phone rang. An unknown number. Valeria was the voice of Gustavo, Elias' advisor, formal, but polite. "Quien habla? I work with Mr. Navarro. He wants to invite you to a different afternoon. Mañana, si estás disponible." It's not a commitment, just something special. She hesitated. She had already crossed many borders that she had never imagined crossing. But something inside her, perhaps curiosity, perhaps intuition, pushed her to say yes. "Where? You will be picked up at 2 in the afternoon. Just wear comfortable shoes." And he hung up. Valeria spent the rest of the evening restless. She chose a simple outfit, jeans and a cotton shirt. Nothing flashy, but she applied perfume, and she tied her hair up more carefully than usual. At the appointed time, a black car with dark windows pulled up in front of the building. The driver kindly greeted her by name. She got in, her heart racing. On the way, she tried to guess where they were going, but she didn't recognize the way. They arrived in a rural area, far from the city. The car stopped in front of an old iron gate, which opened by itself. A tree-lined path led them to an old but welcoming country house. Elias was waiting for her at the entrance, dressed in linen pants and a light shirt. No formality, no ostentatious luxury, just him. "Bienvenida," I said, opening the side gate. "I want to show you something that almost nobody knows about me." Valeria entered, still silent. The smell of wet earth and flowers filled the air. They passed an orchard, stone paths, and a small lake with benches around it. "This was my mother's place," he said. "We used to come here when I was a child. After she died, no one wanted to come back. Pero yo empecé a venir solo. To think, to feel." She looked around. There was beauty there but also melancholy. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because you saw something in me that I myself had forgotten. And that can't be forgotten." They sat in silence for a while. They sat down on a wooden bench under a leafy tree. A group of ducks crossed the surface of the lake, creating small waves. "I don't know what you want from me, Elias," she said, without anger, just wanting to understand. "Pero yo no estoy acostumbrada a juegos." He looked at her seriously. Then he lowered his eyes. "Yo tampoco. Maybe that's why. This isn't a game." Valeria bit her lip, trying to hold back an answer. But something stopped her. There was truth in that man. An imperfect, bruised truth, but real. That afternoon, among silent trees and buried memories, there was no kiss, no promises, but there was a silent pact, that of two worlds trying, against all logic, to meet in the middle of the road. The late afternoon breeze caressed Valeria's hair as she watched Elias walk slowly to a greenhouse at the back of the property. His steps were not those of a man in a hurry, but of someone carrying something too dense to be left behind. She followed him in silence. Inside, the smell of wet earth and old flowers filled the air. Orchids, lavenders, hydrangeas, all arranged with almost ritual precision. In the center of the greenhouse, an iron bench covered in moss, and on it, a framed photograph. A woman with clear eyes and a discreet smile. "Is mi madre," said Elias, without turning around. All this was from her. Valeria moved closer, observing the woman's features in the portrait. There was a tenderness there that didn't match what they said about the Navarros in the newspapers. How did he die? Cancer. Slow, silent. She didn't want treatment. She said she wanted to say goodbye in her own way. "Yo, no supe como acompañarla. I was only working." There was a long pause. Valeria respected the silence. When he died, the only thing he asked for was for part of his fortune to be used to help people without a home. My brothers didn't accept it. They said it was crazy, a betrayal, and since then, I haven't spoken to anyone. He sat down on the bench and wiped his hands across his face. "Yo no soy el hombre que los periódicos describen, Valeria. Nor am I a saint. I was cold, ambitious. I've hurt many people. Aldo tu me diste comida, sin saber quien era. Fu la primera vez que senti que podía voltar a ser alguien decente." Valeria leaned against the greenhouse wall, not looking away. "I don't know you yet, but if you're trying to change, that's something." Elias looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and doubt. "Y tú, quien te enseñó a ver a los invisibles?" She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "My father disappeared when he was 9 years old. My mother died 2 years later. I was brought up by my abuela. She said that you're not measured by what you have, but by how you treat those who have nothing. Sometimes I feel alone, sometimes invisible too." Elias' eyes softened. There was something powerful in that simplicity. She didn't flatter him. She didn't fear him. She didn't desire him for status. She just existed before him, as an equal. "So, maybe we both saw each other when we needed it most," he said. She nodded. But before the moment became something neither of them was ready to face, Valeria stood up. "I should come back. Oh. Mi abuela me espera." Elias stood up too, hesitantly. "Can I come with you?" "No, but you can call me tomorrow, if you still want to talk." And so, with no kiss, no promises, and no happy ending, at least for the time being, the two of them left the greenhouse. But they carried in their hands, and in their hearts, a seed that might one day blossom. On Monday morning, the employees of the Navarro group noticed something strange. The president had arrived early, and alone, without an escort, no warning, without the usual distance that marked his steps. Elias crossed the main hall, as if he were crossing unknown territory. His gaze, once distant, now seemed attentive to the faces, and the silences, around him. He went up to the 20th floor, where the Navarro Institute for Social Innovation worked, a sector practically forgotten by the shareholders. "I want to see the reports from the shelters," I said to the secretary, who widened her eyes. "Sir, the shelters are on hold. The council has frozen the transfers. Defrost. As of today, they will be a priority." Meanwhile, Valeria continued with her routine. She cleaned floors, changed blackboards, and organized chairs. But something had changed in her too. She felt restless, as if she was in the middle of a journey she didn't yet understand. In the late afternoon, his cell phone rang. It was Elias. "Can I see you?" She hesitated, but she said yes. They met in a discreet square, far from the center. No armored cars, no luxury, just the two of them, sitting on a wooden bench, surrounded by mothers with baby carriages and gentlemen playing chess. "I started changing things today," he said. "It will cost me enemies, pero no me importa." Valeria listened attentively, but didn't smile. "Why now?" "Because you've shown me that I don't need to be someone else to be better. I just need to be less of a coward." She sighed. She wanted to believe, but she knew how cruel the world could be to those trying to change. Elias, it's not that easy. There are people who don't want you to change. People who will want to destroy you for trying. I know. My brothers, for example. It was then that she realized. This was more than a novel in the making. It was a collision of worlds, and like every collision, it would leave its mark. A few days later, the newspapers began to report on a series of controversial decisions by the Navarro Group, large donations to social institutions, a review of contracts with companies linked to family members, internal audits in sectors that had been protected for decades. The repercussions were immediate. Part of the media applauded. Another part, financed by Elias' own brothers, raised suspicions and made headlines. The unstable billionaire, outbursts or strategy. Who is manipulating Elías Navarro? It was then that Gustavo, the advisor, entered the office with a worried look on his face. Sir, there are rumors. They're investigating his relationship with a woman. They want to know who she is, and what influence she has over you. Elias looked at him, then at the computer screen, where Valeria's photo, taken from a distance, was already circulating on gossip sites. Let's investigate, I said. I'm not going to hide. But deep down he knew it could ruin everything. Across town, Valeria was reading the same headlines with a knot in her stomach. Her name hadn't been exposed yet, but the rapprochement with Elias was already beginning to emerge from the shadows, and she knew when the world finds out that a powerful man is involved with one of the people, it doesn't forgive. Not out of love, but for daring. The next morning, Valeria found the door of the building scratched with red paint. A single word. Interested. Next to it taped up, a crumpled newspaper displayed on its cover. Oh. La mujer que hechizó al heredero Navarro. Below, a picture of her enlarged, pixelated, clearly taken from a distance, showed her leaving the Alma Vieja restaurant. A few weeks earlier, she felt the ground disappear. She ran up the stairs, ignoring the stares of the neighbors. Inside the apartment, her grandmother was trying to understand what was going on. The television, at low volume, was showing a morning gossip program. ¿Quién es Valeria Rivas? La mujer misteriosa que conquistó al empresario más reservado del país. The camera showed pictures of the building where they lived. Cruel comments flooded social networks. Claro, se hizo la pobrecita y lo pescó. Otro caso de cazafortunas. She doesn't love him. Nadie ama a Enrico, solo su dinero. Valeria turned off the TV, stunned. Her cell phone kept vibrating. Messages from strangers, from schoolmates, from Ines, who was sending indignant audios. Why didn't you tell me? You're in the news, Val. Y no para bien. At the end of the day, she decided not to go out to work. She didn't have the courage. She was afraid. For the first time, the gesture she had made out of kindness was now being used against her. At the other end of the city, Elias was facing another kind of attack. Meetings cancelled, shares plummeting, the board pressing for his resignation, the brothers filing lawsuits to declare him emotionally unfit to run the business. We warn you, said her brother, Nicolas, in a tone somewhere between threatening and pitying. A woman like that doesn't belong in this world. And neither do you. Elias didn't reply, but the fury in his eyes said it all. That same evening, he drove alone to Valeria's neighborhood. He parked far away. He walked through the streets in silence, his cap covering his face. He went up the stairs and knocked on the door. She opened it hesitantly. Her eyes were red. Her grandmother watched from inside, saying nothing. Lo siento, he said in a deep voice. Valeria said nothing, but her eyes said it all. Fear, shame, tiredness. I didn't know this would happen, continued Elias. But I can't pretend you don't exist. I don't want to. She crossed her arms, taking a deep breath. I don't care what anyone says about me. But my granddaughter, my work, my life is being destroyed by something I didn't ask for. Isn't ours worth it? I don't know, maybe. But at this price, I don't know, Elias. Silence. He held out his hand. But she stepped back, her heart squeezing. I need time, space, to think. Elias nodded, without pride. He took a step back, Yo estaré aquí. When you're on the list. He walked down the stairs with heavy steps. Each step sounded like a farewell, not for lack of love, but for too much reality. At the door, Valeria closed her eyes. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She was learning that loving someone like Elias was like trying to hold the wind with your hands. Beautiful, but impossible to maintain without hurting yourself. 2 days after the last meeting, the school where Valeria worked received anonymous complaints. They claimed that she was using work time to meet millionaires, and that her presence was damaging the image of the institution. There were no formal accusations, but enough for the principal, under pressure from influential parents, to call her in for a chat. Valeria, I'm very sorry, but we've been asked to distance ourselves from the scandal. Hasta que se aclare todo. Estás suspendida. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just nodded and picked up her things inside. As she walked down the corridor, with the box in her hands, the children looked at her curiously, some with affection, others repeating what they had heard at home. Is it true that you were going out with a millionaire? Valeria didn't answer. She just left. That same afternoon, in an elegant meeting room in the city's financial center, the board of Grupo Navarro met on an emergency basis. Elias was present, alone, at a long table occupied by men in suits. Among them were his 2 brothers, Nicolas and Sergio. This is unsustainable, said Nicolas. You have put the company's image at risk. The shares have fallen by 14%, and all for a woman. No es una mujer, replied Elias, firmly. Es la única persona que me ha tratado como un ser humano en años. Sergio tapped his fingers on the table. It's not about feelings, it's about control. And clearly, you don't have it anymore. A document was placed in front of him, an official motion to remove him from the presidency, on the grounds of emotional instability and poor management of the corporate image. Elias read everything, quietly. Then he signed. Not as one who surrenders, but as one who prepares the ground for something greater. That evening, Valeria was tidying up the kitchen when she heard a knock on the door. She thought it was the neighbor, but it was Gustavo. Elias wants to see. It's bad. He's been dismissed, and he doesn't want to talk to anyone else. She hesitated, but something in her chest screamed louder than fear. She grabbed her coat, kissed her grandmother's forehead, and left with Gustavo. He found Elias in his country house, the same one where they had visited the greenhouse. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, shoeless, with a crumpled shirt and puffy eyes. Losing the company isn't what's most painful, he said, when he saw her. What's most painful is thinking that I've lost you too. Valeria approached him, knelt down in front of him, and for a moment, just hugged him, strong, long, like someone picking up the pieces of someone who has been broken inside. I haven't lost you, she whispered. I just needed to understand if this is love or ruin. Now, es las cosas, pero quiero seguir. And there on the cold floor of a house far from the world, 2 worlds met again. But reconciliation would bring new threats, and the war, both internal and public, was not over yet. The days that followed were purposefully quiet. Valeria and Elias took refuge in the country house, away from the headlines, the cameras and the networks. There was no social makeup or conventions there. Just 2 survivors rebuilding what the exhibition had almost destroyed. Valeria cleaned the greenhouse, rearranged the flowers, and cooked simple meals. Elias read his mother's old books, looked after the trees, wrote in notebooks that he never showed to anyone. The television remained off. The world outside seemed like another planet. In the evenings, they sat side by side on the lake bench. They spoke little, but the silences were comfortable, as if everything that had hurt before was now recognized, and little by little, transformed. Estoy pensando en empezar de cero, said Elias one day. Create a foundation, use what I have for something worthwhile, but without a name, without a press, no company. Valeria looked at him tenderly. What about me? You would be the soul. Without you, all of this would be meaningless. She smiled discreetly, but her eyes filled with water. The following week, they returned discreetly to the city. They rented a small room in the old town center, where they began to draw up the first plans for the new foundation. The name was chosen, Invisibles. The idea was simple: to feed, train, and employ homeless people, not out of charity, but for justice. Meanwhile, the Navarro brothers gathered in mirrored offices, annoyed by the calm. They had won the legal battle, but they knew Elias had been discredited, not defeated. And now, with the narrative of the rejected billionaire who stands next to the simple woman gaining traction on the networks, they were losing control of the story. If we let him become a martyr, we're finished, said Nicolas. Sergio slammed his hand on the table. Then let's go to the girl. If she falls, he falls. A few days later, Valeria received a summons. They accused her of using false documents to get her old job, an anonymous complaint, based on bureaucratic errors from years ago, which had been ignored until then. Now they were resurfacing as an attempt to tarnish her integrity. Elias reacted immediately. He hired lawyers, gave interviews, exposed the abuse. But Valeria refused. No quiero que pelees por mí, she said. Quiero pelees por mí, she said. Quiero pelees por mí, misma. She went to court with her head held high. She explained her humble origins, the administrative errors, the lack of access to guidance. She spoke truthfully, calmly, and with dignity. And what began as an attempt to defame her became a headline of resistance. Valeria Rivas, la mujer que enfrenta sola al Imperio Navarro, from invisible to unstoppable. Elias watched the audience from the back of the hall. He didn't intervene. He just smiled, thrilled to see the woman for whom he had fallen to his knees, now standing before the world, without fear. As he left, Valeria hugged him, strong. I don't need you to save me, Elias. I just need you to accompany me, always. And for the first time they both understood. Their love wasn't born of the difference in their worlds, but of the same thirst for dignity. The sentence was read out on a gray Thursday morning. The judge, in a firm voice, declared that there was no evidence of bad faith, nor any concrete proof of fraud in the documents presented by Valeria years ago. The case was dismissed. Her name was cleared. When they left the courthouse, there were no fires or celebrations, but there was something deeper: respect. People who had previously crossed their eyes when they saw her, now waved. Some, moved, thanked her for giving a voice to so many others who, like her, had been judged without being heard. In the same week, the Invisibles Foundation was officially inaugurated. The first unit was set up in an old refurbished shed, with a communal kitchen, temporary accommodation, and training workshops. Valeria was appointed CEO. Elias, her strategy partner. But out of the spotlight for the first time, on the opening day, a group of journalists tried to elicit statements, provoke scandals, and relive the past. But Valeria responded with a single sentence: "We're not here to be news, we're here to change it." The phrase went viral. As the weeks went by, the initiative began to grow. Other entrepreneurs began to donate. Volunteers came forward. Stories of reintegration, of families reunited, of lives rebuilt, began to spread through the networks, like little embers of hope. Then the unexpected happened. The federal government, pressured by public opinion and the symbolic power of the project, invited Elias to take on the leadership of a new social development secretariat, not because of his fortune, but because he had the courage to step down from his pedestal and get dirty with real pain. He refused the first time, but the second time, he asked for something in return. "Evoy, Valeria comes with me, and not as a decorative figure. I see her as what she is, the one who taught me to look." The deal was sealed. The appointment generated debate, applause, and criticism.
Like everything that challenges structures.
The night before the inauguration, the two walked through the same square where, months earlier, they had met for the first time. "Will you run this bank?" said Elias. "Of course. That's where I assumed you were real." He knelt down, not in a hurry, not afraid, lightly, like someone who no longer owes anything to the world, only to the truth itself. "Valeria Rivas, would you stay with me, even if you had nothing but this bench in your hand?" She smiled. And the answer came as an old promise finally found voice. I would stay, even if the world gave us the sword again. The kiss that sealed that moment wasn't cinematic, it was human, warm, eternal in its simplicity. The next morning, while the country watched the new political chapter of an ex-billionaire and his unlikely partner Valeria put on her foundation uniform, said good morning to the volunteers, and served coffee to the newly arrived residents. Because for her, glory was never power. It was always seeing the invisible.